Subscribe now, because what you're about to read will prove that sometimes walking away from everything you think you want is the only way to find what you truly deserve. A brilliant 30-year-old architect presenting her career-defining project when the most ruthless billionaire developer in Poland walks into the room and changes everything. 4 hours of intense debate that turns into 2 weeks in Warsaw, professional boundaries that dissolve into passion, and a discovery in his desk drawer that reveals she's just the latest in a pattern. She expects devastation when she finds the folder full of women who came before her. Instead, she finds something more powerful: clarity. This story has a whirlwind romance that feels like destiny, late-night conversations on rooftop terraces that bare souls, the sickening moment when love reveals itself as strategy, and an ending where the woman doesn't wait to be discarded. She leaves on her terms, with her dignity intact and her future in her own hands. Don't miss a single moment of this journey from seduction to self-discovery to the triumph of choosing yourself. A winter morning in Krakow greeted Natalia Stempien with piercing cold. Snow gently fell on the cobblestone streets of the old town, creating a white covering on historic buildings. Natalia, a 30-year-old architect with amber eyes and chestnut hair, walked down Florianska Street toward her office. Her steps echoed off old tenements, and her breath turned into small clouds of vapor. Today, she was supposed to present her renovation project for a historic building on the main square. She'd worked on it for months, putting her whole heart into every detail. This was her chance to prove her worth at Visionary Designs, the architectural firm where she'd worked for 5 years. In her hands, she clutched a folder with designs and a cup of hot coffee from a local cafe. The coffee burned her fingers through the paper cup, but that pain was nothing compared to the stress she felt thinking about today's presentation. Today everything changes, she whispered to herself, passing St. Mary's Basilica. This project has to succeed. The office was located in a restored building on Braca Street. Natalia entered the elegant lobby, nodded to the security guard, and headed toward the elevator. Her thoughts circled around the presentation, checking every detail in her head, every possible gap in her argument. When the elevator stopped on the 4th floor, Natalia took a deep breath and stepped out straight into chaos. The office was in a state of unusual agitation. Employees talked in hushed voices, and Anna the secretary was running around with papers in her hands. "What's happening?" Natalia asked, stopping Anna. "Haven't you heard?" Anna's eyes widened in amazement. "Christian Stempien is taking over the main square renovation project. He's already in the conference room with management." Natalia felt blood draining from her face. Christian Stempien, one of the richest people in Poland, owner of the real estate empire Stempien Investments, was famous for ruthlessness in business and perfectionism bordering on obsession. Stempien, but why? Our project. Apparently he saw potential. Anna shrugged. "You'd better hurry. They're waiting for you." Natalia felt her heart pounding in her chest as she walked down the corridor to the conference room. She opened the door, and all eyes turned toward her. At the table sat the company's management, and at the end stood a man she knew only from newspapers and television. Christian Stempien was about 40 years old but looked younger, tall, with broad shoulders and intensely blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. His black suit fit his athletic figure perfectly, and his short-cropped dark hair had a few gray streaks at the temples that added character. "Ms. Stempien, I assume." His voice was deep and melodious. "Interesting. We're not related by chance." "I doubt it," Natalia replied, trying to sound professional despite her nervousness. "It's a fairly common name. Pity." He smiled slightly. "It's always nice to have talented family." The company director, Mr. Nowak, cleared his throat significantly. "Natalia has prepared a presentation of the project, Mr. Stempien. Shall we begin?" Natalia spread out her materials and turned on the presentation. Initially, her voice trembled slightly, but with each minute, she gained confidence. She talked about preserving the historic character of the building while introducing modern solutions, about materials she planned to use, about architectural details she wanted to highlight. The entire time she felt Christian Stempien's intense gaze on her. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just observed her with an unreadable expression. That was more stressful than any questions he could have asked. When she finished, silence fell. Christian Stempien walked around the table and stood right in front of her designs spread on the table. Interesting approach, he finally said, running his finger over one of the drawings. But I have several reservations. For the next 20 minutes, he criticized every aspect of her project. He questioned the choice of materials, technical solutions, even the work schedule. His every word was like a small knife stabbing into her professional pride. Natalia felt anger rising in her. She'd worked on this project for months. She'd consulted every detail with the historic preservation officer. And this man, who'd seen the project for the first time, had the audacity to crush it like this. With all due respect, Mr. Stempian, she finally interrupted him, unable to listen to more criticism. But these solutions are well thought out and comply with the preservationists' guidelines. The change in materials you're suggesting would disturb the historic character of the building. Dead silence fell in the room. No one ever interrupted Christian Stempian. No one questioned his opinion, and certainly not a young architect who should be grateful for the mere opportunity to present her project to him. To everyone's surprise, the corner of Christian's mouth lifted in a barely perceptible smile. You defend your vision. That's good, he said quietly. But are you ready to modify that vision if better solutions appear? I'm open to discussion, but not to compromises that would threaten the project's integrity, Natalia replied, looking him straight in the eye. For a moment, they measured each other with their gazes. Natalia felt her cheeks burning, but she didn't look away. In that case, let's talk about these solutions, Christian finally said, taking off his jacket and draping it over the back of a chair. We'll spend some time on this. And so began the longest discussion in Natalia's professional life. For the next 4 hours, they debated every aspect of the project. Christian questioned her decisions, but listened to her arguments. Natalia defended her vision, but began to see value in some of his suggestions. The rest of management discreetly left the room after some time, leaving them alone over spread plans and sketches. They didn't even notice when darkness fell outside the windows and Krakow's lights blazed in the winter scenery. I think we've reached an agreement, Christian finally said, straightening and stretching. Your vision with my corrections. This will be an exceptional project. Natalia felt a strange mixture of pride and irritation. On one hand, she'd managed to defend most of her ideas. On the other, she had to admit that some of his suggestions actually improved the project. Thank you for your time, she said, gathering her materials. I'll implement the changes and send a new version by the end of the week. No, Christian shook his head. We'll work on this together. I personally supervise all my investments. Natalia froze. Together. But this is my project. Which I'm financing, he reminded her gently. Besides, I rarely meet someone who has the courage to oppose me. It's refreshing. Natalia didn't know what to answer. The prospect of daily cooperation with Christian Stempian was both exciting and terrifying. I'm inviting you to dinner, Christian added, glancing at his watch. We need to discuss the details of our collaboration, and we both deserve a good meal after this battle. Thank you, but I can't, Natalia replied automatically. She herself didn't know why she refused. Maybe it was self-preservation instinct. Christian raised an eyebrow. That wasn't a social proposal, Mrs. Stempian. It's part of our professional relationship. In that case, I can propose lunch tomorrow, Natalia replied, gathering the rest of her things. I really have to go now. Christian looked at her for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind. All right, lunch tomorrow. I'll send a car for you at noon. Natalia wanted to protest, say she'd get there herself, but gave up. Some battles were better left for later. When she left the office, Krakow was already plunged in winter darkness. Snow was falling more heavily, and frosty wind pierced through her thin coat. Natalia stopped for a moment, staring at the illuminated main square. Her life had just changed course, and she wasn't sure if it was a change for the better. The phone in her pocket vibrated. Unknown number. Tomorrow. Restaurant Under the Angel. 12:30. Looking forward to continuing our discussion. CS. Natalia felt her heart accelerate. How did he have her number? And why did this message provoke such a reaction in her? Walking toward the tram stop, Natalia couldn't stop thinking about Christian Stempian's intensely blue eyes and how he'd looked at her during the presentation, as if he saw more than she was showing. It was unsettling and exciting at the same time. Getting on the tram, Natalia had no idea that this day was just the beginning, that Christian Stempian would soon become not only her business partner, but someone who would turn her ordered life upside down. Outside the tram windows, snow swirled in the light of street lamps, and Natalia looked at winter Krakow, wondering what tomorrow would bring. The next day, Natalia woke with a strange feeling of unease. For a moment she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment in Kazimierz, wondering what awaited her. Meeting with Christian Stempian. Business lunch, she reminded herself firmly. Nothing more. She got up and approached the window. Krakow was waking to life under a thick layer of snow. Heavy grey clouds hung in the sky, heralding another snowy day. Natalia sighed, wondering what to wear. It was just a business lunch, but she knew that Restaurant Under the Angel was one of the most elegant in the city. After long deliberation, she chose a navy dress to the knee and black blazer. Professional, but not too formal. She tied her hair in a loose bun, allowing a few strands to fall freely around her face. At 11:30, her phone rang. "The car is waiting downstairs," said a male voice. Natalia looked through the window. Indeed, a black limousine was parked in front of her building. She sighed and grabbed her purse. The sooner this ended, the better. The driver opened the door for her without a word. The car's interior was luxurious but understated. Leather seats, dark wood, subtle scent of men's cologne. Natalia sat down, feeling out of place in this luxury. Restaurant Under the Angel was located in a historic building, on the main square. When Natalia entered, she was immediately surrounded by an atmosphere of elegant calm. Warm light, dark wooden furniture, white tablecloths, and crystal glasses. "Mr. Stempian is waiting in the private room," said the waiter, leading her through the main hall. Private room. Of course, someone like Christian Stempian didn't eat with other guests. Christian stood when she entered. He was dressed in a dark suit that seemed made especially for him. It probably was. "Ms. Stempian, thank you for punctuality," he said, indicating the chair across from him. "Natalia, please," she replied, sitting down. "If we're going to work together, we can use first names." Christian raised an eyebrow but nodded. "In that case, Christian," he said, pouring wine into her glass. "White wine from a local vineyard. I hope you like semi-dry?" Natalia nodded, though she preferred red. She hadn't come here to discuss wines. "I reviewed your suggestions," she began, pulling out a notepad from her purse. "Some of them are interesting, but I have several reservations." Christian smiled slightly as if he'd expected this. "First, let's eat," he said, as the waiter placed appetizers before them. "Business always goes better after a good meal." For the next half hour they talked about nothing concrete. About Krakow, about architecture, about changes that had occurred in the city over recent years. Natalia reluctantly admitted to herself that Christian was an intelligent conversationalist. He knew a lot about architecture, city history, and his opinions were thoughtful, even if she didn't always agree with them. "How long have you worked as an architect?" he finally asked when the waiter cleared the plates before serving the main course. 8 years, she replied, "but at Visionary Designs only for 5. And how did it happen that such a talented architect still works for someone else?" In his voice was genuine curiosity. "You should have your own studio." Natalia shrugged, turning the wine glass in her hands. "Not everyone has ambitions of being the boss." "I don't believe that." Christian shook his head. "I saw how you defended your project. That's not the attitude of someone who doesn't have ambition." Natalia looked him straight in the eye. "Maybe I just prefer to focus on designing rather than managing a business." Christian studied her for a moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Or maybe you're just afraid of risk," he asked quietly. Natalia felt a sting of irritation. "You don't know me," she said coolly. "Don't judge me based on one meeting." "You're right," he agreed, to her surprise. "I'm sorry. That was out of place." For a moment they sat in silence. Natalia began to regret her sharp reaction. After all, Christian was her client. She should be more professional. "Going back to the project," she began, but Christian interrupted her. "No, you're right. I judge people too quickly. It's my flaw," he said, setting down his napkin. "Come, I'll show you something." "Now?" Natalia frowned. "We were supposed to talk about the project." "And we will," he assured her, standing. "But first I want to show you something important." Natalia hesitated, but curiosity won out. They left the restaurant and got into the waiting limousine. "Where are we going?" she asked as the car started. "You'll see," he replied enigmatically. The car headed toward Podgorze, a district of Krakow on the right bank of the Vistula. They stopped in front of an old, neglected building on Józefinska Street. "What is this place?" Natalia asked as they got out of the car. Christian didn't answer immediately. He approached the building's door and opened it with a key he pulled from his pocket. "This is my first project," he finally said, leading her up creaking stairs. "I bought this building 15 years ago when no one wanted to invest in Podgorza." They went up to the top floor, and Christian opened a door leading to the roof. Natalia followed him out and froze with impression. From the roof spread a spectacular view of Krakow, Wawel Castle, the old town, the Vistula winding through the center of the city, everything covered with white fluff of snow that was still gently falling. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Christian asked quietly, standing beside her. "Amazing," she admitted, unable to tear her gaze from the city panorama. "I bought this building with money borrowed from my father," Christian said, leaning on the railing. "Everyone said it was madness, that Podgorza would never change, that it was throwing money in the mud. But you were right," Natalia guessed. Christian nodded. "I restored it, sold it at a profit, and bought another, and another. That's how it started." He sighed. "But this building was always special to me. That's why I never sold it." Natalia looked at him with surprise. This Christian was different from the man she'd met in the office. More open, less cold. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. Christian was, silent for a moment, looking at the city. "Maybe I wanted you to see that I'm not just a businessman counting profits," he finally said. "That architecture and the history of this city matter to me." Natalia didn't know what to say. This honesty was unexpected. They stood like that for a moment in silence, looking at Krakow covered with snow. The wind was cold but didn't bother them. There was something intimate in this moment, in sharing this view, in standing shoulder to shoulder on the roof of an old building. "You're cold," Christian stated, seeing Natalia shiver slightly. Before she could protest, he took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The material was warm from his body and smelled of his cologne, woody, masculine scent, with a note of bergamot. "Thank you," she said quietly, surprised by this gesture. Their gazes met, and Natalia felt a strange tension between them, something electric that made her heart beat faster. "We should go back," she said quickly, stepping away. "I still have a meeting at the office." Christian nodded, but in his eyes she saw something she couldn't interpret. Disappointment? Understanding? They returned to the car and drove toward her office. The entire way they talked about the project, about technical details, about deadlines, safe topics, professional. But Natalia couldn't stop thinking about that moment on the roof, about that look, about the scent of his jacket on her shoulders. When they reached Visionary Designs, Christian stopped her as she was about to get out. "Tomorrow I'm leaving for Warsaw for a few days," he said. "But I'd like you to come with me. I have another project there that might interest you." Natalia hesitated. "I can't just leave," she said. "I have responsibilities, other projects." "I already talked to Mr. Nowak," Christian interrupted her. "He agreed that you'd work exclusively on our project for the next month." Natalia felt a surge of irritation. "You should have talked to me first," she said coolly. "It's not fair to arrange such things behind my back." Christian had at least enough decency to look contrite. "You're right," he admitted. "I'm sorry. It was an impulse." Natalia sighed. "I need to think about it." "Of course," Christian agreed. "Let me know by evening. My driver can pick you up tomorrow morning at 8. Natalia got out of the car, feeling strange. On one hand, she was irritated by his arrogance. On the other, the prospect of working on a bigger project was tempting. Or maybe it was about something more, about that strange energy between them that she'd felt on the roof. For the rest of the day, she couldn't focus on work. Her thoughts kept returning to their meeting, to the view from the roof, to the way he looked at her. It was absurd. He was her client, her boss in a sense. She shouldn't think about him that way. In the evening, sitting in her apartment with a cup of tea, she still hadn't made a decision. A trip to Warsaw with Christian was risky. Not professionally. That could be a great opportunity. But in every other way. The phone vibrated on the table. Message from Christian. "Tomorrow at 8:12. Say yes." Natalia smiled involuntarily. His confidence was irritating but also attractive. She was about to reply when another message came. "Please." That one word changed everything. Christian Stempian, a man who probably never asked for anything in his life, was asking her. With a beating heart, she replied, "All right, I'll be ready at 8 hours." The response came immediately. "Good choice. See you tomorrow, Natalia." She put down the phone, wondering if she'd really made a good decision. Something told her this trip to Warsaw would change everything, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. That night she dreamed of blue eyes and the Krakow panorama from the old building in Podgorza, and when she woke, the first thing she thought about was Christian Stempian and their journey together that was to begin in a few hours. She got up from bed and approached the closet, wondering what to pack for the trip to Warsaw. Business? Private? Somewhere in between? She had no idea, and that terrified her most of all. Morning greeted Natalia with thick fog rising over Krakow. She stood by her apartment window with coffee in hand, observing as the city slowly woke to life. In 2 hours she was supposed to leave for Warsaw with Christian Stempian. The mere thought provoked mixed feelings in her, excitement and unease simultaneously. Packing her suitcase had taken most of the night. She didn't know what to expect, so she prepared for various scenarios. Business clothes, but also something more casual. After all, she had no idea how long she'd stay in Warsaw or what their schedule would look like. Exactly at 8, the black limousine stopped in front of her building. Natalia took a deep breath, grabbed her suitcase, and went downstairs. To her surprise, Christian was waiting for her personally, leaning against the car. "Good morning," he said, smiling slightly. He looked impeccable in a dark coat and gray scarf. "Ready for an adventure?" "This is a business trip, not an adventure," she reminded him, trying to sound professional, though the sight of his smile caused a strange flutter in her stomach. Christian took her suitcase and handed it to the driver, then opened the car door for her. "Every trip can be an adventure if you just allow it," he said with a gleam in his eye as she got in. The car's interior was as luxurious as leather seats, wooden finishes, discreet classical music in the background. Christian sat beside her rather than across from her as she'd expected. He was within arm's reach, which made her very aware of his presence. "How long will the journey take?" trying to ignore his closeness. "About 3 hours, Christian replied, pulling out a laptop. "We can use this time to discuss the Warsaw," and so their journey began. For the first 2 hours they talked about business. Christian showed her plans for an old manor on the outskirts of Warsaw that he planned to transform into a luxury boutique hotel. Natalia was impressed by the project and quickly became engaged in the discussion, suggesting changes and improvements. "You're exactly as talented as I thought," Christian said at one point, looking at her with admiration as she sketched an alternative solution for the main hall. Natalia felt her cheeks warming under his intense gaze. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, focusing on the sketch. "You do more than most people I know," he said quietly. "That's rare in today's world." Natalia didn't know what to answer, so she said nothing. For the rest of the journey they worked in comfortable silence, occasionally exchanging comments on the project. Warsaw greeted them with bright winter sun. Snow sparkled on the streets as the limousine glided through downtown toward the Bristol Hotel. Natalia knew it was one of the most expensive hotels in the Bauer city, but she was still surprised by the luxury that surrounded her when they entered. "I reserved an apartment for you," Christian said when the receptionist handed them room keys. "I hope you'll be comfortable." "Apartment?" Natalia raised an eyebrow. "That seems excessive," Christian shrugged. "I like my colleagues to have comfortable conditions. Let's meet in the lobby in an hour. We'll go see the manor." Natalia nodded and followed the hotel porter to her room. The apartment was dazzling. Elegant living room, bedroom with an enormous bed, marble bathroom with a bathtub in which at least 3 people could bathe. From the windows spread a view of Saxon Garden, now covered with white fluff of snow. She freshened up and changed into a black suit and white shirt, professional and elegant, ideal for a business meeting. When she came down to the lobby, Christian was already waiting for her. He was talking to a middle-aged man, but at the sight of her he immediately brightened. "Natalia, meet Andrzej Witkowski, my architect from Warsaw," he said, introducing them. "Andrzej, this is Natalia Stempian, new talent on our team." Andrzej shook her hand with a smile, but Natalia couldn't shake the impression that he was measuring her with reserve. She didn't blame him. He was probably wondering why Christian had brought a new architect when he already had an experienced specialist. "I heard about your project in Krakow," Andrzej said. Impressive solutions. Thank you, Natalia replied, wondering how much Christian had told him about her. They went together to see the manor. It was located in Wilanov, surrounded by an old park. A 19th-century building, once belonging to an aristocratic family, now neglected and requiring major renovation. But even in this state, Natalia could see its potential. For the next 3 hours, they walked through the building, discussing possible solutions, preserving historic character while adapting it to modern hotel standards. Andrei was competent and inventive, but Natalia noticed that Christian more often asked for her opinion, was more interested in her suggestions. When they were returning to the car, Andrei stopped her for a moment. "I don't know what's between you and Christian," he said quietly, "but be careful. He always gets what he wants." Natalia felt blood draining from her face. "There's nothing between us except professional cooperation," she replied quickly, maybe too quickly. Andrei smiled sadly. "Of course," he said, but in his voice was disbelief. "Good luck with the project." Throughout the drive back to the hotel, Natalia was silent, thinking about Andrei's words. Did Christian really have hidden intentions toward her? Or was it just jealousy from an experienced architect who felt threatened by a younger colleague? "What are you thinking about?" Christian asked, pulling her from her thoughts. "About the manor," she lied. "I'm wondering how to preserve those beautiful stuccos in the main hall." Christian looked at her for a moment, as if he knew she wasn't telling the truth but didn't push. "I'm inviting you to dinner," he said instead. "There's a restaurant nearby I'd like to show you." Natalia hesitated. Dinner with Christian. Just the two of them. That sounded dangerously close to a date. "I'm a bit tired," she began. "It's not far," Christian assured her. "And I promise we'll talk only about work." Something in his tone, maybe that note of amusement, made Natalia agree. "All right, but we're coming back early. We have a lot of work tomorrow." The restaurant was discreet and elegant. Dark wood, candles on tables, quiet music in the background. Decidedly romantic. Natalia felt uncomfortable when the waiter led them to a table in a secluded corner. "Do you like the manor?" Christian asked when they'd ordered wine. "It's beautiful," she admitted honestly. "But it requires enormous work, and it will be expensive." "Money isn't a problem," Christian said, waving his hand as if shooing away a pesky fly. "What matters is that the result is spectacular." "What about Andrei?" Natalia asked, playing with her napkin. "He seems competent." "He is," Christian agreed, "but he lacks your spark." "Spark?" Natalia raised an eyebrow. "Passion," Christian explained, leaning over the table. "I saw how your eyes shone when you looked at those old stuccos, how you immediately had a vision of what to do with them." Natalia felt her cheeks warming again. She wasn't used to such compliments. "It's just my job," she repeated what she'd said in the car. "No," Christian shook his head. "It's more than work. It's passion, and that's what makes you exceptional." Natalia didn't know what to answer, so she took a sip of wine, trying to hide her embarrassment. Dinner passed in a pleasant atmosphere. They talked about architecture, about travels, about books. Christian turned out to be well-read and intelligent conversationalist. Natalia caught herself laughing at his jokes, listening to him with interest, wanting to know more about his life. "How did your adventure with architecture begin?" Christian asked when the waiter brought dessert. Natalia hesitated. It was a personal story she rarely shared. "My grandfather was a carpenter," she finally said. "He had a workshop in Nowa Huta. As a child, I spent a lot of time there, watching him create beautiful furniture from pieces of wood. He taught me to see beauty in structure, in form, in materials." Christian listened to her attentively with genuine interest. "When I was 12, my grandfather got sick with cancer," Natalia continued, playing with her spoon. "Before he died, he left me his notebook with designs and said, 'Natalia, create spaces where people will be happy.' And that's how I started dreaming of being an architect." "And you fulfilled that dream," Christian said quietly. "Yes." Natalia smiled slightly, "though it's not always easy." "What do you mean?" Natalia sighed. "Architecture is still a male world. As a woman, I have to work twice as hard to prove my worth." She looked him straight in the eye. "That's why this project in Krakow mattered so much to me. It was my chance to show what I'm capable of." "And you showed it," Christian assured her. "That's why you're here." Natalia realized that for the first time in a long while she'd opened up to someone. told about her dreams, fears, difficulties, and Christian listened, really listened. When they were returning to the hotel, the night was clear and frosty. Warsaw glistened with winter brightness. They walked, since the restaurant really was nearby. Natalia felt strangely calm, as if she'd known Christian for years, not days. "Thank you for a nice evening," she said when they reached the hotel. "I'm the one thanking you," Christian replied, "for your honesty." They stood for a moment in the lobby, looking at each other. Natalia felt tension between them, the same electricity she'd felt on the roof in Krakow. But now, it was more intense, more insistent. "Good night, Christian," she finally said, stepping back. "Good night, Natalia," he replied without taking his eyes off her. Natalia turned and headed toward the elevator, feeling his gaze on her back. When the elevator doors closed, she leaned against the wall and sighed deeply. What was happening to her? How could she feel such attraction to a man she'd known only a few days? It was unprofessional, unreasonable, dangerous. And yet when she closed her eyes, she saw his blue gaze, felt the warmth of his presence, heard his deep voice. In her apartment, Natalia took a long, hot shower, trying to wash these feelings off herself. But they didn't disappear. They were with her when she lay down in bed, when she fell asleep, when she dreamed. In the morning, the phone woke her. It was 7:30. "Natalia." Christian's voice sounded urgent. "Sorry to wake you so early, but we have a problem." "What happened?" she asked, immediately awake. "The historic preservation officer has reservations about the project. He's going to the manor in an hour. We need to be there." "I'll be ready in 15 minutes, she said, already getting out of bed. "You're amazing," Christian said gratefully. "I'm waiting for you in the lobby." Natalia dressed in record time. She pulled her hair into an elegant bun and applied minimal makeup. Exactly 14 minutes later, she was in the lobby. Christian was waiting for her, talking on the phone. At the sight of her, he immediately hung up. "Thank you," he said as they headed to the car. "Not everyone would react so calmly to such an early morning surprise." "It's part of the job," Natalia replied, fastening her seatbelt. "What exactly are the preservationists' reservations?" Throughout the drive to Wilanów, Christian explained the situation. The preservationist had concerns about the scale of proposed changes to the building's structure. He believed too many original elements would be destroyed or modified. When they arrived, Andrei was already there, talking to a serious-looking middle-aged man who must be the preservationist. "Miss Gustempien," Andrei greeted her with obvious relief. "Mr. Kowalski was just explaining his reservations to me." The preservationist looked at her skeptically. "Am I to understand you're the new architect on this project?" he asked coldly. "I'm working on it together with Mr. Witkowski," Natalia explained, not letting herself be intimidated. "Could I see the specific points that raise your doubts?" For the next 2 hours, Natalia listened to the preservationist's reservations, asked questions, proposed alternative solutions. She noticed that Christian mainly stayed silent, letting her lead the conversation. Andrei contributed his comments from time to time, but she was the main negotiator. "I understand your concerns," Natalia finally said, standing in the manor's main hall. "And I agree that preserving the building's historic character is crucial. But I think we can find a solution that will satisfy all parties." The preservationist studied her attentively. "I'm listening." Natalia took a deep breath and began presenting her vision. She talked about using original materials, about restoring historic elements, about subtly introducing modern amenities in a way that wouldn't disturb the building's character. Her voice was confident, her arguments thoughtful, her passion visible in every word. The preservationist listened with increasing interest. When she finished, he nodded with recognition. "That sounds promising," he admitted. "If you prepare a detailed plan incorporating these solutions, I'm willing to consider it." "Thank you," Natalia said with a smile. "We'll be able to send it within a week." When the preservationist drove away, Christian approached her with a wide smile. "You were magnificent," he said, not hiding his admiration. "You convinced him in 2 hours. My lawyers have been trying for weeks." "It wasn't that hard," Natalia replied modestly. "We just had to understand his perspective." Andrei looked at them with a strange expression, something between amusement and resignation. "I'll leave you two alone," he said, gathering his things. "I have another meeting. Natalia, can we meet tomorrow to discuss these new solutions?" "Of course," Natalia agreed. "What time?" "I'll call you. Andrei promised, then left, leaving them alone in the empty manor. For a moment there was silence. Natalia was very aware of the fact they were now alone in an empty building, with that strange energy between them that seemed to grow with every moment they spent together. "You really were magnificent," Christian repeated quietly, approaching closer. "Thank you," Natalia replied, feeling her heart accelerate. "Not just today," Christian continued, standing right in front of her. "Since the moment I met you." Natalia felt her throat tightening with emotion. They were so close she could feel the warmth of his body. She saw every detail of his face, every line, every shadow. "Christian," she began, not knowing what she wanted to say, but she didn't have to say anything. Christian leaned down and kissed her, gently, questioningly, as if giving her a chance to pull away. But Natalia didn't want to pull away. She responded to the kiss, throwing her arms around his neck. This was the moment when all her professional resolutions, all rational thoughts dissolved in the warmth of his lips, in the strength of his arms. Embracing her waist, in the intensity of feelings he awakened in her. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. Natalia looked at him with wide eyes, surprised by the intensity of her own emotions. "I'm sorry," Christian said, though he didn't look contrite. "I couldn't stop myself." "Don't apologize," Natalia replied quietly. They stood like that for a moment, holding hands, looking at each other in silence. It was a moment that changed everything, and they both knew it. The following days in Warsaw passed like a feverish dream. Natalia and Christian worked on the manor project, meeting with Andrei, the preservationist, suppliers. And at night they discovered each other in the luxury apartment at Hotel Bristol. It was madness. Natalia knew it. She'd gotten involved in a romance with a client, with a man who was practically her boss. Everything she'd warned herself against for years. And yet when she was with him, she couldn't regret it. The week in Warsaw extended to 2. They worked intensively, but also found time to explore the city, for candlelit dinners, for long conversations about their dreams and plans for the future. Christian turned out to be a different person than the one she'd met in the Krakow office. With her, he was warm, open, sometimes even uncertain. He showed her a side of himself no one else saw, the sensitive man behind the mask of ruthless businessman. On the last evening in Warsaw, they sat on the terrace of Christian's apartment wrapped in blankets, drinking red wine and looking at the illuminated city. "I don't want to go back to Krakow," Natalia admitted quietly, resting her head on his shoulder. "You don't have to," Christian replied, holding her tighter. "You can stay here with me. We can work together on the Warsaw project." Natalia raised her head, looking into his eyes. "What about the project in Krakow?" "Andrei could finish it," Christian said, stroking her hair. "Or we could work on both. Travel between cities." It sounded so tempting. To be with Christian, work on exciting projects, share life with him. But something deep in Natalia's soul still hesitated. "It's complicated," she said quietly. "Everything is happening so fast." Christian took her face in his hands. "Sometimes it's like that," he said seriously. "Sometimes you meet someone and you just know it's that person." "Do you feel that way?" Natalia asked, feeling her heart accelerate. "Yes," Christian replied without hesitation. "I've felt it since the moment you walked into the conference room in Krakow and started defending your project." Natalia smiled, remembering that day. It seemed so distant, as if years had passed, not weeks. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but I didn't want you to see it." "I didn't see it," Christian assured her. "I only saw a confident, talented woman who charmed me." Natalia kissed him, feeling warmth filling her. But that feeling of uncertainty didn't completely disappear. Too much had changed in too short a time. The next day they returned to Krakow. Natalia agreed to stay in Christian's apartment in the old town, at least temporarily. Her small apartment in Kazimierz now seemed so distant, as if it belonged to another life. The first days after returning were like an extension of their Warsaw bubble. They worked together on the building project, spent evenings in luxury restaurants, and nights in his apartment. Natalia felt like she was in a fairy tale, but reality has a way of eventually intruding. The first sign that not everything was ideal was the reaction of her colleagues from Visionary Designs. When she appeared at the office to discuss details of leaving the project, Anna the secretary greeted her coldly. "We thought you'd forgotten about us," she said, with barely concealed irony. Since you met Stempian, you've barely been here. I was working on the Warsaw project, Natalia explained, feeling strangely uncomfortable. Of course, Anna raised an eyebrow, significantly. The project. Similar reactions met her from other colleagues. No one said anything directly, but she felt their looks, heard whispers falling silent when she entered a room. And when she met with Director Nowak to discuss her future at the firm, his words were like a bucket of cold water. I've always valued you as an architect, Natalia, he said, looking at her over his glasses. But I didn't expect you'd choose this career path. I don't understand what you're suggesting, she replied stiffly. I'm not suggesting anything, he shrugged. I just see what's happening. Christian Stempian has a reputation. You're not the first young, attractive architect he's taken on a project. Natalia felt as if someone had slapped her. It's not like that, she said quietly. I hope so, Nowak replied, sighing. For your sake. You're too talented to be another trophy on his shelf. Those words haunted Natalia for the following days. She tried to ignore them, focus on the happiness she felt with Christian. But the seed of doubt had been planted. And then there was that evening, a week after their return from Warsaw. They were sitting in an exclusive restaurant in Krakow. Christian had just been discussing plans for another project when he saw someone at the bar. Excuse me for a moment, he said, standing. I need to greet a friend. Natalia watched as he approached an elegant middle-aged man. They exchanged handshakes, a few words, and then the man said something that made them both look in her direction. They smiled in a way that made Natalia suddenly feel like an exhibit in a museum, like something you look at, evaluate, admire, but don't treat as an equal. When Christian returned to the table, Natalia couldn't stop herself. What were you talking about? Nothing important, Christian replied lightly. Old business. But Natalia knew that wasn't the whole truth. She saw it in his eyes, in the way he avoided her gaze. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay beside sleeping Christian, staring at the ceiling, weighing Nowak's words. Was she really just another conquest? Another attractive woman Christian had seduced and would then abandon? In the morning she made a decision. She had to know. She waited until Christian left for a meeting, then did something she never would have expected of herself. She searched his office. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for until she found it. A folder in the desk drawer labeled Personal Projects. With trembling hands she opened it. And there they were, photographs. Christian with different women, elegant restaurants, luxury hotels, exotic beaches, smiling faces, flirtatious looks, intimate moments, and underneath, documents, employment contracts, project reports, the names of the women from the photos, now as architects, interior designers, consultants working for Christian, and then termination letters. End of cooperation. The pattern was obvious. Christian found talented women, seduced them, gave them work, and then when he got bored, got rid of them. Professionally, elegantly, with generous severance packages, but got rid of them nonetheless. Natalia felt nauseous. She leaned against the desk, trying to calm her breathing. This couldn't be true. Not her Christian. Not the man who whispered tender words to her, who understood her passion for architecture, who looked at her with such admiration. But the evidence was relentless. She was another in a long line, maybe special in her own way. Each of them probably was, but not the only one, and certainly not the last. For the next few days, Natalia played her role. She smiled, worked on the project, shared a bed with Christian. But inside, something had broken in her. Every touch, every tender word now seemed calculated, practiced, repeated dozens of times with other women. She had to make a decision, and she already knew what it would be. But first, she had to secure her future. She arranged a meeting with Andrzej Witkowski when he was passing through Krakow. You knew, she said without preamble when they met in a cafe far from downtown. You knew what Christian is like. Andrzej sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. I tried to warn you. Yes, very subtly, Natalia said bitterly. You could have said it directly. And would you have believed me? Andrzej asked, looking her straight in the eye. At that moment, Natalia was silent, knowing he was right. She'd been too charmed by Christian, too absorbed in what was budding between them. "What are you going to do now?" Andrei finally asked. "Leave," she replied without hesitation, "but on my terms." The plan was simple. Natalia knew that the Krakow project was especially important to Christian. He'd invested not only money, but his prestige in it. The presentation of the project for city authorities and investors was to take place in 2 days. Everyone was waiting for a spectacular renovation project for the historic building that was to be the calling card of Stempien Investments in Krakow, and Natalia intended to give them exactly what they expected. For the next 48 hours, she worked like crazy, perfecting every detail of the project, implementing final corrections. Christian was delighted with her dedication, not knowing that every hour she spent on the project was part of her escape plan. The day of the presentation came quickly. The conference hall at City Hall was filled to capacity. Officials, investors, journalists. Christian looked impeccable as always in his perfectly tailored suit. He smiled at Natalia with pride as they stood before the audience. "I have the honor of presenting Ms. Natalia Stempien, the lead architect of this project," he said, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Her talent and vision have made this project exceptional." Natalia smiled, feeling a strange calm. This was the end, but also a beginning, her own beginning. The presentation went perfectly. Natalia presented the project with passion and professionalism. She answered questions with ease and confidence. She saw recognition in the listeners' eyes, satisfaction on Christian's face. After everything, when they were receiving congratulations, Christian leaned to her ear. "You were magnificent," he whispered. "Tonight we'll celebrate." Natalia smiled, knowing there would be no celebration for her. When the last guest left the hall, Christian was pulled into conversation with the city mayor. Natalia used that moment. "I need to step out for a moment," she said, when he looked at her questioningly. "I'll be right back." But she didn't come back. Instead, she went straight to Christian's apartment. Her suitcase was already packed, hidden in the closet. She took her things, leaving keys and a short letter on the table. "The project is finished. Our collaboration as well. Thank you for everything you taught me, about architecture and about myself. Don't look for me, Natalia." And then she was in a taxi, heading to the airport. The ticket to Barcelona was bought yesterday, as was the rented apartment and arranged meeting with a potential employer, a small but renowned architectural studio that appreciated her portfolio. The phone rang incessantly, but she didn't answer. Finally, she turned it off completely. When the plane lifted off from the ground, Natalia felt both sadness and relief. Sadness because despite everything, despite awareness of who Christian really was, part of her still loved him. That Christian she'd met on the roof in Podgorza, the one she'd spent nights with in Warsaw talking until dawn. But relief because she was leaving as an architect, not as another conquest. The project she left behind was her work, her vision. No one could take that from her. And wherever she went, whatever she created, she would always do it on her own terms. 6 months later, Natalia stood on the terrace of her small apartment in Barcelona, looking at the city bathed in southern sun. Life here was different, full of new challenges, new possibilities. She worked on exciting projects, met new people, learned the language. Sometimes she thought about Christian. She knew from business news that the Krakow project had been completed with great success. Her project, her vision, her legacy. The doorbell pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it expecting a courier with documents she'd ordered. But at the door stood Andrzej Witkowski with a slight smile on his face. "Can I come in?" he asked. Natalia hesitated but stepped aside, letting him in. "What are you doing here?" she asked when they sat in her small living room. "I have a proposal," Andrzej said, pulling out a folder with documents. "I'm opening my own studio in Barcelona. I need a partner, someone with vision and courage." Natalia looked at him surprised. "Why me?" "Because you're the best," Andrzej said simply, "and you proved you have not only talent but character." Natalia took the documents, reviewing them slowly. The proposal was generous and fair. Equal partnership, shared vision, projects she'd always dreamed of. "What does Christian say?" she asked, knowing Andrzej still worked for him. "Isn't this a conflict of interest?" "I don't work for him anymore," Andrzej explained. "I left right after you. Your departure inspired me to make my own decision." Natalia smiled slightly. "So what? We're rebels now?" "We're architects," Andrzej replied seriously. with our own vision and our own principles. Natalia looked again at the documents, then through the window at Barcelona's panorama. Sun reflected in glass facades of modern buildings, contrasting with the historic architecture of the old town. So different, yet creating harmonious whole. Like her and Andre, different, but with similar approach to architecture, with similar values. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something that would be truly her own. "All right," she said, extending her hand. "Partners." Andre shook her hand with a smile. "Partners," he repeated. And so, in sunny Barcelona, far from winter Krakow and memories of Christian Stempian, Natalia found her path, not as someone's conquest, not as someone's trophy, but as an architect, partner, woman who knows what she wants. And when sometimes she thought about that mysterious night, about Christian, about what might have been, she didn't regret, because what she gained, her independence, her pride, her future, was worth any price. Life doesn't always work out as we plan. Sometimes we have to lose to gain. We have to leave to find our path. And that's exactly what Natalia Stempian did. If this story resonated with you, remember, the pattern reveals itself when you're brave enough to look. Share this with someone who needs to hear that gut feelings matter more than pretty words. That investigating when something feels wrong isn't paranoia but self-protection. That leaving before you're discarded is power, not weakness. And that your work speaks louder than any man's validation. Subscribe if you believe in women who check the drawer, in architects who finish the project before they walk away, in ending things on your terms with your head high, and in cities like Barcelona, where you rebuild yourself into someone who never settles for being anyone's pattern again. Because sometimes all it takes is one folder of photographs to save yourself, one plane ticket to reclaim your life, and the courage to choose your career over a man who was never going to choose you.